thought for Eleven's once upon a time in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek. Alina Hayes, a resilient 74-year-old widow, had spent her life weaving a tapestry of love, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. Born in the dusty farmlands of rural Kansas during the tail end of the Great Depression, Alina learned early on that hard work was the only currency that mattered. She married her high school sweetheart, Thomas, at 18, and together they built a modest life in the city, raising 4 children on his mechanic's salary and her earnings from waitressing and later, managing a small diner. Thomas passed away 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving Alina adrift in their cozy 2-bedroom bungalow, surrounded by echoes of laughter and the ghosts of family holidays. Alina's eldest son, Marcus, a 48-year-old accountant with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, had been the one to insist she move in with him and his family after Thomas's funeral. "Mom, you can't rattle around in that old house all by yourself," he'd said, his voice laced with what Alina mistook for genuine concern. "Come stay with us. Sarah and the kids would love having Grandma around." Sarah, Marcus's wife, a part-time real estate agent with a penchant for designer handbags, nodded enthusiastically, her smile wide but her eyes calculating. Their 2 children, teenage daughter Sophia, 16, obsessed with social media and cheerleading, and younger son Lucas, 12, a budding soccer star, seemed excited at first, peppering Alina with questions about her famous apple pies and stories from the old days. Alina sold the bungalow, pocketing a tidy sum of $150,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage. She tucked most of it into a high-yield savings account, intending it as a safety net for emergencies or perhaps to help with her grandchildren's college funds someday. The move to Marcus's spacious, 4-bedroom home in an upscale neighborhood felt like a fresh start. At first, everything was idyllic. Alina reveled in her role as the family matriarch, waking early to brew coffee, packing lunches for the kids, and tending to the garden that Sarah had always neglected. Her monthly pension of $2,200 from years of Social Security contributions and a small retirement fund from the diner felt like a blessing she could share. "Let me chip in for groceries," she'd offered one evening, pulling out her checkbook. Marcus had protested mildly. "Mom, your family, not a tenant." But Sarah's eyes had lit up, and soon Alina's contributions became a regular part of the household budget. But as months turned into years, the warmth faded like a summer sunset. Subtle shifts began to erode Alina's sense of belonging. Marcus and Sarah started making decisions without consulting her, redecorating the living room in sleek modern furniture that clashed with Alina's cherished antique clock, or planning vacations she wasn't invited on. Her room, a converted home office at the back of the house, was cramped and overlooked, with a single window facing the neighbor's fence. "We'll fix it up soon," Sarah had promised, but 6 years later it remained unchanged, a stark reminder of her diminished status. The turning point came one crisp autumn Sunday during their weekly family brunch. Alina had risen at dawn to prepare her signature quiche, bacon, and fresh-baked muffins, just as she had for decades. The table was set with the good china, and the aroma of coffee filled the air. Marcus's siblings, younger brother Nathan, a teacher with a gentle soul but a tendency to follow the crowd, sister Clara, a nurse married to her high school sweetheart, Ben, and the youngest, Olivia, a freelance graphic designer, had all come over with their families. Laughter echoed as they caught up, but Alina noticed the undercurrents. Whispers about finances, sidelong glances at her as she served plates. It was Clara who dropped the bomb mid-conversation with Ben. "Mom's pension is basically family money at this point," she said casually, spearing a piece of quiche. "It could go toward that new roof we're all chipping in for or even help with Sophia's college fund. Better us than wasting it on, well, you know." She glanced at Marcus, who nodded approvingly, while Sarah added, "Absolutely. We're the ones taking care of her, after all." Alina froze, ladle in hand, her cheeks flushing with a mix of humiliation and rage. Lucas looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin, while Sophia scrolled through her phone, oblivious or uncaring. Nathan and Olivia exchanged uneasy looks but said nothing, their silence a betrayal that cut deeper than words. Alina continued serving, her hands steady despite the storm inside. She retreated to her room afterward, the weight of 74 years pressing down on her. That night, sleep evaded her. Clara's words replayed like a broken record. Mom's pension is basically family money. As if Aliner's lifetime of toil, waitressing through pregnancies, scrimping to afford braces for Nathan, working double shifts to fund Clara's nursing school, meant nothing. As if her pension wasn't earned through sweat and sacrifice, but a handout ripe for the taking. Memories flooded back in the quiet hours. She recalled the winter when Thomas lost his job, and Alina took on extra cleaning gigs to keep the lights on, her hands raw from bleach and cold. Or the time Olivia, at 10, dreamed of ballet lessons. Alina sewed costumes for the neighborhood theater to pay for them, staying up until midnight with needle and thread. Nathan's first car, a beat-up sedan, bought with money from her overtime at the diner. Clara's wedding, modest but beautiful, funded by Alina's secret savings jar. And Marcus, always the ambitious one, whose college tuition came from refinancing their home, a risk Thomas and Alina took without hesitation. Yet now, they treated her like an ATM with legs. Over the years, her contributions had escalated from voluntary to expected. Half her pension went to bills, then groceries, then extras like Sophia's new laptop or Lucas's soccer camp. Marcus and Sarah's lifestyle had upgraded noticeably. A luxury SUV in the driveway, weekend getaways, high-end kitchen gadgets. Alina had rationalized it as helping family, but Clara's comment stripped away the illusion. She was no longer mom or grandma. She was a resource to be exploited. The next morning, Alina rose early and took a solitary walk through the leaf-strewn streets, the chill air sharpening her resolve. She returned to find Sarah in the kitchen sipping coffee. "Out early, Mom. You should be careful at your age," Sarah said with feigned worry, her tone dripping with condescension. Alina smiled thinly. "Just clearing my head, dear." Inside, a fire kindled. She spent the day alone, jotting notes in an old leather-bound journal hidden in her dresser. Lists of grievances. The ignored birthdays, the dismissed opinions, the growing isolation from her other grandchildren, whom Marcus subtly discouraged from visiting too often. As the week unfolded, Alina observed her family with fresh eyes. She overheard Marcus and Sarah discussing a cruise, factoring in her pension for the deposit. Nathan dropped by briefly, only to borrow money for a quick fix on his car, promising repayment that never came. Clara called not to check on her, but to vent about work, ending with, "Oh, and if you could spot us for Ben's tools." Olivia, the most distant, sent texts about graphic design gigs, but never asked how Alina was faring. One evening, while dusting the study, Alina stumbled upon an open laptop, Marcus's bank app still logged in. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the screen glowed with their joint account balance, $28,000 in savings plus investments. Her heart raced. They weren't struggling, they were hoarding while squeezing her dry. That night, the dam broke. Tears came, but so did clarity. She wasn't a burden, she was being burdened. Alina began her quiet rebellion. First, she contacted a lawyer friend from her diner days, learning about senior housing options and protecting her assets. She withdrew her savings discreetly, transferring it to a new account in her name only. She researched assisted living communities, not nursing homes, but vibrant places with activities, independence, and no judgmental eyes. One caught her fancy: Maple Grove residences, with gardens, classes, and trips for residents. Confrontation came at the next family dinner, a tense Friday affair. As they passed plates of roast chicken Alina had prepared, Marcus broached the topic. "Mom, we're thinking about that new car. Your pension could cover the down payment, it's for the family after all." Alina set down her fork, her voice steady. "No, Marcus, my pension is mine. I've given enough." The table fell silent. Sarah's face twisted in shock. "What do you mean, we're family?" Clara chimed in. "Mom, don't be selfish. We've taken you in." Nathan and Olivia shifted uncomfortably, Ben avoiding eye contact. Alina stood, her 74 years lending her an unshakable dignity. "Taken me in? Like a stray? I've raised you all, sacrificed everything. But you've forgotten that. I'm moving out to a place where I'm valued for me, not my money." Arguments erupted, accusations of ingratitude, pleas for understanding. Sophia and Lucas watched wide-eyed, perhaps learning a lesson in respect. Alina held firm, packing her bags that weekend with help from a sympathetic neighbor. At Maple Grove, Alina blossomed. She joined a book club, learned painting, and made friends who shared stories without ulterior motives. Her children visited sporadically at first, guilt-ridden apologies turning into genuine reconnections as they saw her thrive. Marcus and Sarah struggled initially without her financial crutch, learning to budget on their own. Clara reflected on her words, sending a heartfelt letter of remorse. Nathan and Olivia stepped up, hosting family gatherings where Alina was the honored guest. In time, forgiveness came, not blindly, but earned. Alina Hayes, once invisible, reclaimed her story, proving that strength isn't measured in years, but in the courage to demand respect. And in her cozy apartment overlooking blooming gardens, she finally slept peacefully, her heart whole once more. 7/9 How Can Grok Help? Once upon a time in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, there lived an elderly widow named Alina Thompson. At 74 years old, Alina had spent the last 6 years living with her eldest son, Marcus, and his family. After her beloved husband, Harold, passed away from a long battle with cancer, Alina had sold their cozy home in the countryside and moved in with Marcus, his wife Sophia, and their 2 teenage daughters, Olivia and Mia. It seemed like the perfect arrangement at first, a way for Alina to stay close to her family while they provided her with companionship and care. In return, she contributed half of her modest pension each month to help with household expenses, or so she thought. Alina's days were filled with routine. She woke early to brew coffee, folded laundry that seemed to multiply endlessly, and prepared simple lunches for the girls when they came home from school. Sophia, a part-time accountant, often thanked her with a quick smile before rushing off to errands or social gatherings. Marcus, who worked as a sales manager, would pat her on the shoulder and say, "We couldn't do it without you, Mom." But over time, those words began to ring hollow. Alina's other children, her daughter Clara and her youngest son, Victor, visited sporadically, always with warm hugs but fleeting conversations. It all started to unravel one crisp autumn morning in late September 2025. Alina was tidying up the living room when she stumbled upon a forgotten envelope tucked behind a stack of magazines on the coffee table. It was a bank statement addressed to Marcus and Sophia. Curiosity got the better of her. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the bold numbers on the page caught her eye. Their savings account balance was a staggering $65,000. Alina's heart skipped a beat. For years, Marcus and Sophia had lamented about financial struggles, how the mortgage was a burden, how school fees for the girls were skyrocketing, how they relied on her pension to keep the lights on. Yet here was proof of a hefty nest egg, untouched and growing. She sat down heavily on the worn sofa, the room spinning around her. If they had this much saved, why did they insist on her monthly contribution of $1,200? Why did Sophia sigh dramatically whenever Alina asked for a small favor, like a ride to the doctor, claiming gas was too expensive? The truth hit her like a cold wave. They didn't need her money to survive. They wanted it to thrive. Her pension was padding their lifestyle, allowing them to save aggressively while enjoying luxuries she was excluded from. Alina felt a deep ache in her chest, a betrayal that cut sharper than any physical pain. Over the next few days, Alina observed her surroundings with fresh, wary eyes. The kitchen had been remodeled just last summer: granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, a fancy espresso machine that hummed softly in the corner. Marcus had claimed it was a necessary update funded by a work bonus, but now Alina wondered. The girls' closets overflowed with designer clothes and gadgets. Olivia sported a new smartphone every year, while Mia attended expensive dance classes. Meanwhile, Alina's wardrobe consisted of thrift store finds, and her gifts from the family were practical items like socks or generic pain relievers. Family dinners out were a regular occurrence for Marcus and Sophia, often under the guise of needing a break from the chaos at home, chaos that included caring for her. Alina's role in the household became painfully clear. She was the unpaid help. She scrubbed bathrooms, weeded the garden, and babysat the girls on weekends so Marcus and Sophia could escape for romantic getaways. But her stories of her youth during the post-war era, of Harold's adventures as a traveling salesman, of the joys and sorrows of raising 3 children, fell on deaf ears. The family would nod politely, then change the subject or scroll through their phones. She was invisible, valued only for her utility. One evening, as Alina lay in her small guest room, once a storage closet converted hastily with a twin bed and a lamp, she overheard a muffled argument through the thin walls. Marcus's voice was low but insistent. "We can't keep this up forever, Soph. She's getting frailer. What if she needs full-time care?" Sophia replied sharply. "Then we'll figure it out. But until then, her check keeps coming. Maybe a home would be kinder in the long run." The words stung like venom. They weren't discussing her well-being. They were calculating costs and benefits, as if she were a depreciating asset. The following day was Wednesday, the day Clara usually stopped by for tea. But this time, Alina braced herself, scrutinizing her daughter's every move. Clara arrived promptly at 3 p.m., her arms laden with a tote bag that seemed heavier than usual. "Hey, Mom, how's life treating you?" she asked, her cheerfulness forced. They sipped herbal tea in the sunroom, chatting about weather and celebrity gossip, but Clara's eyes darted nervously. Finally, she reached into the bag and pulled out glossy pamphlets. "Mom, Victor and I have been chatting about your setup here with Marcus," Clara said, her voice overly bright. "We thought you might like some alternatives, for the future." The pamphlets were for upscale retirement communities, places with manicured lawns, group activities, and on-site nurses. "This one has yoga classes and a spa," Clara enthused, flipping through pages. Alina glanced at the fees, $2,400 per month, the exact amount of her full pension. It wasn't random. Clara had chosen options that would consume every penny, leaving Alina dependent and penniless outside their control. "Why now, dear?" Alina asked, her tone steady despite the turmoil inside. Clara fidgeted. "Well, you're not as spry as you used to be, and Sophia mentions how tiring it is sometimes. A place like this could give you independence and friends your age." Independence, Alina thought bitterly. It was code for isolation, a way to offload her while claiming her income. "Did Marcus put you up to this?" she pressed. Clara flushed. "We've all discussed it, for your sake." The lie hung in the air like smoke. That night, after Clara left with her pamphlets and a hurried goodbye, Alina allowed herself to weep. Not from weakness, but from fury, at her children for treating her like a commodity, at herself for enduring it so long. She had poured her life into them. Late nights nursing fevers, sacrifices to fund their educations, endless support through their adult struggles. In return, they saw her as a burden to be managed. But from that despair rose resolve. Alina decided she would reclaim her life. No more passivity, she would act. Thursday morning, while Sophia was at yoga and Marcus at work, Alina dressed in her best blouse and slacks, grabbed her purse, and took the city bus to the local credit union. The ride gave her time to reflect, the overheard conversations, the hidden savings, the retirement home schemes. It all painted a portrait of greed masked as concern. At the credit union, a compassionate advisor named Jamal listened patiently as Alina poured out her story. "I want control over my pension," she declared. Jamal nodded, explaining her rights. She could reroute deposits to a new account, perhaps at a different institution, inaccessible to her family. He outlined senior benefits she was unaware of: subsidized utilities, meal delivery programs, low-income housing vouchers. "Ms. Thompson," he said gently, "your money is yours. Family can't dictate its use without your consent." His words ignited a spark in her soul, reminding her of her autonomy. Returning home, Alina found Sophia in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with unusual vigor. "Where were you, Mom? We worry when you disappear." The concern felt performative. "Just handling some errands at the credit union," Alina replied calmly. Sophia's knife paused. "About what?" Tension laced her voice. "My finances," Alina said, meeting her gaze. Dinner that evening was strained. Marcus prattled about a potential promotion, but the air crackled with unease. The girls ate quietly, sensing the shift. For Alina, it was empowering. She no longer felt like an intruder in their world. Over the weekend, Victor dropped by unannounced, joining a family barbecue in the backyard. Conversation turned to household budgeting, with subtle hints about Alina's contribution being vital for upcoming vacations. Alina listened silently, her mind elsewhere. That Monday, she returned to the credit union alone, determination stealing her steps. "Jamal, I'm ready," she told him. He helped her open a new account at a rival bank and initiate the pension transfer. It would kick in next month. She also accessed the proceeds from her old home sale, $120,000 forgotten in a dormant account. Seeing that sum, Alina gasped. It was enough for a small apartment, perhaps even travel, freedoms she'd denied herself. Weeks passed as Alina planned discreetly. She researched affordable senior apartments online at the library, applied for housing assistance, and packed a suitcase with essentials, hidden under her bed. Her family noticed her quiet confidence but dismissed it as old age whims. The climax came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Alina waited until the house was empty, Marcus at work, Sophia shopping, girls at school. She left a note on the kitchen table. "I've decided to live independently. My pension will no longer contribute here. Thank you for the years, but it's time for me to prioritize myself. Love, Mom." With her savings transferred and a taxi waiting, Alina moved into a cozy one-bedroom in a senior community downtown. It had a community garden, weekly bingo, and neighbors who listened to her stories with genuine interest. For the first time in decades, she cooked for herself, read books late into the night, and even joined a painting class. Her children reacted with shock and anger, calls flooded in accusing her of abandonment. Marcus demanded explanations, Clara wept about family unity, Victor threatened legal action over her duties. But Alina stood firm, her voice steady on the phone. "I've given enough. Now it's my turn." In time, the calls lessened. Alina rebuilt her life, forging friendships and rediscovering joys like weekend trips to the beach. She volunteered at a local shelter, sharing her wisdom with others in similar situations. Her children visited occasionally, their interactions tentative but improving, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps genuine remorse. At 74, Alina Thompson had rewritten her story. No longer a footnote in others' lives, she was the author of her own, embracing freedom with open arms. And as she watched the sunset from her balcony one evening, she whispered to Harold's memory, "I did it, love. I'm finally free." Once upon a time in the bustling suburb of Willow Creek, there lived an elderly man named Harold Thompson. At 74 years old, Harold had spent the last 6 years under the roof of his son, Marcus, and Marcus's wife, Alina. What had started as a temporary arrangement after Harold's wife, Margaret, passed away from a long battle with cancer, had turned into a permanent fixture in their lives, or so they thought. Harold had sold his modest home to cover medical bills and funeral costs, and with nowhere else to go, Marcus had insisted he move in. "Family takes care of family," Marcus had said back then, his voice warm and reassuring. But over time, that warmth had cooled into something far more calculated. Harold's days were a monotonous routine of quiet servitude. He rose at dawn to brew coffee and prepare breakfast for the household. Marcus, a mid-level accountant who left for work by 7 a.m. Alina, a part-time real estate agent with erratic hours. And their 2 teenage grandchildren, Sophie and Liam, who were Marcus's kids from a previous marriage. Harold would pack lunches, tidy the kitchen, and handle the laundry, tasks he took on willingly at first, grateful for the shelter. In return, he received a small bedroom in the basement, sparsely furnished with a twin bed, a rickety dresser, and a single window that overlooked the neighbor's fence. His Social Security checks and a modest pension from his days as a factory foreman were deposited directly into a joint account Marcus had set up, ostensibly for household expenses. Harold never questioned it. He trusted his son. But whispers of discontent began to creep in. Harold overheard conversations late at night when Marcus and Alina thought he was asleep. "Dad's pension covers the mortgage this month, thank God," Marcus would say, his voice laced with relief rather than gratitude. Alina would chime in, "And with the kids' college funds dipping, we might need to dip into his savings for Liam's tuition. He's getting old, he won't notice." These words stung like hidden thorns, planting seeds of doubt in Harold's mind. Was he family, or just a financial safety net? He felt invisible, his stories of the war ignored, his advice on fixing the leaky faucet dismissed with a wave. Sophie and Liam barely acknowledged him beyond mumbled thanks for meals, their eyes glued to screens. Harold began to withdraw, spending more time in his basement room, flipping through old photo albums of happier times with Margaret. One crisp autumn morning in October 2025, everything shifted. Harold had a doctor's appointment downtown, a routine checkup for his arthritis. Marcus dropped him off curtly, saying, "Don't take too long, I have a meeting at noon." Left to his own devices after the appointment, Harold decided to wander. He hadn't explored the city alone in years. Alina always insisted on driving him, claiming the buses were too dangerous for someone your age. But today, with time on his hands, he stopped by his old bank branch, a place he hadn't visited since moving in with Marcus. The familiar lobby brought back memories of independence, of handling his own finances without oversight. Seated across from a young teller named Sarah, Harold inquired about his accounts. "I'd like to check my balances," he said, his voice steady but soft. Sarah pulled up the records, her eyes widening slightly as she reviewed them. "Mr. Thompson, you have a substantial savings account here, over $85,000, untouched for years, and your pension deposits are consistent at $2,200 monthly. The joint account with your son shows regular withdrawals, but your personal one is intact." Harold blinked in disbelief. He had forgotten about the separate savings he'd set aside decades ago, a nest egg from overtime work and careful scrimping. Marcus had convinced him it was safer in the joint account, but clearly, not everything had been transferred. Sarah leaned forward, her tone kind. "Have you thought about your options? With this, you could afford a nice senior apartment or even a small condo. Independence doesn't have to end at your age." Her words ignited a spark Harold hadn't felt since his youth. For 6 years, he'd lived as a shadow in his son's home, cooking meals that went unappreciated, cleaning up after family gatherings where he was relegated to the corner like forgotten furniture. But now, the truth dawned. He wasn't destitute. He had means. He had choices. Buoyed by this revelation, Harold treated himself to lunch at a nearby diner. A hearty sandwich and a milkshake, luxuries Alina deemed wasteful on a fixed income. As he ate, he watched the world outside. Seniors strolling arm in arm, a group of retirees laughing over coffee, a man his age reading a newspaper alone but content. Why had he surrendered his autonomy? Fear of loneliness. Guilt over burdening his son. No more. That afternoon, Harold took a bold step. He boarded a bus to visit his old army buddy, Frank Rivera, who lived in a quiet neighborhood across town. Frank, a widower himself, had invited Harold countless times, but Marcus always found excuses. "Too far, Dad. Gas is expensive." Today, Harold ignored the imagined objections. The journey, 2 buses and a short walk, felt liberating, each stop a mile away from his confined life. When Frank opened the door, his weathered face broke into a grin. "Harold, you old dog, what brings you here? Did Marcus finally let you off the leash?" They laughed, but as Harold explained his solo adventure, Frank's expression turned serious. "Something's up, pal, you look alive again." Over tea in Frank's cozy living room, Harold poured out his heart. The overheard conversations, the sense of being a paycheck rather than a parent, the erosion of his dignity. Frank listened, nodding knowingly. He'd faced similar strains with his own daughter before moving into a senior community. "Harold, that's no way to live. You're not an ATM, you're a man who's earned his peace." When Harold asked what he'd do, Frank didn't hesitate. "My place has an extra room since my grandson shipped out to college. It's yours if you want it. We split costs, play cards, watch the games, no judgments, no obligations. We're veterans, we look out for each other." The offer was a lifeline. Harold felt a surge of hope, mingled with trepidation. Could he really upend his life at 74? But as he rode home that evening, the city lights blurring past, he knew the answer. He was done being a silent contributor to someone else's comfort. Arriving back at Marcus's house, he found the family in their usual chaos. Alina greeted him with a frown. "Where have you been all day? We were worried sick." Her concern felt performative, laced with irritation. "Visited Frank," Harold replied calmly. Marcus glanced up from his laptop. "Frank, how'd you get there? That's miles away." "Bus," Harold said, meeting his son's eyes. "I'm not helpless, you know." Dinner that night was tense. Sophie complained about school. Liam scrolled through his phone and Marcus droned on about work stresses. Alina eyed Harold suspiciously. "You seem off, Harold. Everything all right?" He could have confronted them then, laid bare the hurt, the exploitation. But he sensed it would fall on deaf ears. "Just thinking about the future," he said vaguely. Marcus perked up. "Future, like what? We've got plans for that extra room upstairs, maybe convert it for Sophie." The casual assumption of his space, his money, solidified Harold's resolve. In the quiet of his basement room, Harold began plotting. He researched senior apartments online using the old tablet Frank had lent him years ago. But Frank's offer appealed more: companionship without isolation. Over the next week, he discreetly gathered his belongings: faded war medals, letters from Margaret, a toolbox of heirlooms, photos of his grandchildren as toddlers. Everything fit into a duffel bag and a suitcase. He transferred his pension to his personal account, leaving just enough in the joint one to cover the current month's contributions. No theft, just reclamation. He observed the family's rhythms: Marcus out by 7, Alina by 8:30 for showings, kids to school by 8. Mornings were his window. He called Frank to confirm. "Next Wednesday, buddy. I'll pick you up in my truck, no taxi needed." The days ticked by in a haze of anticipation. Harold watched his family with a bittersweet lens. Part of him yearned for a sign of genuine care, a hug without motive, a conversation beyond bills. But Marcus grumbled about rising costs, Alina hinted at needing help with the car payment, and the kids remained distant. On Tuesday night, his last in the house, Harold lay awake, not with anxiety but excitement. Freedom beckoned. Wednesday morning broke with a gentle rain. Harold waited until the door clicked shut behind Liam. Then he moved. Frank arrived promptly at 9, his truck idling curbside. "Ready for adventure?" Frank joked, helping with the bags. Before leaving, Harold left a note on the kitchen counter, penned with steady hand. "Dear Marcus, Alina, Sophie, and Liam. For 6 years, I've called this house home, but it's felt more like an obligation than a haven. I've overheard talks of my pension as your lifeline, my savings as your backup plan without a thought to my own wishes. I've given freely meals, chores, love, but received little in return beyond a roof and reminders of my burden. I raised you, Marcus, to value family, not finances. Today I reclaim my life. I'll be with Frank, living on my terms. Don't fret, I'm capable and content." Perhaps this teaches that elders deserve respect, not just resources. With love, but firm resolve. Dad, Grandpa Harold. As Frank's truck pulled away, Harold glanced back one last time. No regrets shadowed his heart. They arrived at Frank's modest bungalow by noon. The spare room was welcoming: a full bed, a desk, even a TV. "Welcome home," Frank said, clapping him on the back. That evening they grilled steaks, shared war stories, and laughed until their sides ached. Harold's phone buzzed with missed calls from Marcus, texts pleading, "Where are you? And we need to talk." He responded briefly, "I'm safe." Letter explains. Days turned to weeks. Marcus visited once, apologetic but defensive. "We didn't mean it that way, Dad." Harold forgave, but didn't return. He volunteered at the local VFW, joined a walking group, even started dating a widow named Clara from bingo night. In time, the family dynamics shifted. Sophie and Liam visited on weekends, curious about Grandpa's new life, sharing stories without screens. Marcus and Alina, facing tighter finances, learned humility. Harold thrived, a testament that age doesn't dim one's spirit. In Willow Creek, he wasn't a burden. He was Harold Thompson, free at last. When the cab pulled away from the modest brick house where I'd spent the last 6 years, I didn't glance back. Not because of bitterness, but because my gaze was fixed ahead, toward a future where I would be seen, appreciated, and where my voice carried weight. Margaret squeezed my hand during the drive and whispered, "Alina, you're making the bravest choice. Sometimes we must step away from those we cherish to show them our true worth." As the cab wove through the bustling suburban streets, a genuine smile crossed my face, the first in years, knowing I was finally authoring my own chapter. The note I'd left on the kitchen counter was concise yet deliberate, each syllable weighed like gold. "Dear family, you've made it abundantly clear that my retirement savings mean more to you than my companionship. Now you can have the companionship without me, and I'll hold on to my savings. Don't search for me. Alina." Sarah phoned me frantically that very afternoon, her voice a storm of sobs and shouts, demanding to know my whereabouts and insisting I return at once. In the background, James bellowed about the mounting utility bills and mortgage payments. But for the first time ever, I ended the call on my own terms, standing resolute in my resolve. Thomas appeared at Margaret's doorstep 3 days later, attempting to coax me home with promises of change. Yet, seeing me comfortably ensconced, Having orchestrated every detail of my departure independently and radiating no remorse, he sensed a profound shift in me, a steel I hadn't shown before. Those initial weeks at Margaret's were an awakening, a rebirth, rising each morning without the shadow of being a burden, sharing quiet breakfasts over coffee, discussing our day's adventures without interruption, lounging in front of the TV, selecting shows that sparked joy, free from exasperated sighs. Margaret evolved from a mere acquaintance into the confidant I'd always yearned for, a kindred spirit like a long-lost sibling. Our dialogues delved deep, laced with empathy and equality. She absorbed my tales of yesteryears with rapt attention, and I reciprocated, savoring her narratives without the pull of obligations. My retirement fund, once siphoned into a household's endless demands, now afforded me a life of quiet elegance and indulgences I'd long denied myself. We divided household costs fairly, leaving me surplus for elegant blouses from the boutique downtown, salon visits for a fresh highlight, and spoiling Margaret with brunches at quaint cafes overlooking the river. For the first time in half a decade, I felt vibrant, cherished, and utterly alive. When Rebecca visited a month in, tears streaming, offering apologies laced with pleas, I embraced her warmly but held my ground. My path was set, unyielding. Margaret's circle of companions gathered every Thursday at the community garden for gentle yoga and heartfelt chats. Hesitant at first, I yielded to her gentle nudge. "Eleanor," she urged, "these women have walked paths like yours. They'll embrace you as one of their own." And she was spot on. Meeting Faith, Dorothy, and Vivian unveiled a sisterhood of silver-haired warriors who'd battled ungrateful kin. Faith shared how her daughter had schemed to liquidate her assets for personal gain. Dorothy recounted discovering her son pilfering from her savings for frivolous gadgets. Vivian had been confined to her home, deemed too frail by her family to venture out unescorted. Each had summoned the fortitude to reclaim their autonomy, and they enveloped me in their fold like a prodigal finding her way. In those early months, Sarah persisted with entreaties to return, vowing transformations. But I'd learned that vows born of panic seldom endure. My responses remained compassionate yet unswerving. I'd sacrificed decades for them. Now it was my turn. On her final desperate plea, 3 months post-departure, as she wept at Margaret's fence, I peered through the lace curtains and murmured to myself the words that etched my independence in stone. "You wished I'd fade into the background. Consider it done." Alex was the sole family member to pierce my defenses, arriving unannounced 2 months after my exit. It was a crisp Friday evening. Margaret was out volunteering when the bell chimed. There stood my grandson, eyes swollen from grief, voice cracking like the boy he'd once been. "Nana," he pleaded, "may I come in? We need to talk." I ushered him to the cozy den, now partly mine, and let him gather his thoughts. "Nana, I'm devastated by how we behaved," he confessed, averting his gaze. "At first, I bought Mom and Dad's line that you'd lost your mind, some senior quirk. But without you, the truth hit hard." He painted a vivid picture of the home's descent. Sarah and James clashing over finances without my buffer, the one-study rooms now chaotic, meals devolving into greasy deliveries that drained their wallet faster than my grocery runs. "Worst of all," Alex choked out, tears flowing, "we never inquired about your feelings, your dreams. You were invisible unless we needed cash or chores." In mere months, my grandson had blossomed into a young man of insight, shedding the apathy modeled by his parents. I explained gently, distance wasn't rejection but a lesson in appreciation. "I didn't leave from lack of love," I assured him. "I left because I love myself enough to demand respect." When he queried a return, I was candid. "Alex, profound shifts require time, not haste. Your folks must prove it through deeds." Post that heart-to-heart, sporadic outreach from my other children ensued. Thomas rang bi-weekly, his tone laced with unease, navigating our new dynamic where I wasn't at his beck and call. Rebecca dropped by monthly, our exchanges strained as she downplayed my grievances, insisting I'd overreacted. Then one overcast Tuesday, she arrived with gravity etched on her face. "Mom," she ventured post-greetings, "I must share something. Sarah and James are drowning financially. Without your contributions, bills pile up. James eyes overtime, Sarah a full-time gig." It was predictable. I'd tallied my inputs worth long ago, foreseeing the ripple. "And," I probed calmly. "Well," she fidgeted, "perhaps you could chip in temporarily, family solidarity and all." Ah, the familiar refrain, my resources as communal property, irrespective of mistreatment. Rebecca, I countered steadily. For 6 years, I bolstered them with funds, labor, childcare. When did they reciprocate? When did my heart matter? She invoked familial bonds, unity in adversity. But I was done with rhetoric masking exploitation. If they seek aid, start with genuine remorse, not excuses. Then, demonstrate evolution via actions. The ensuing months bloomed with serenity I'd scarcely known. Margaret and I crafted rituals, dawn teas watching sunrise, garden strolls, shared market halls, and feasts we savored. Afternoons varied books, classic films, or profound musings on existence. I unearthed dormant passions, knitting intricate scarves, a hobby shelved amid motherhood's whirl. Margaret accompanied me to the yarn shop, transforming her spare study into our creative nook. My initial pieces were rustic, but progress brought joy, crafting for pure delight. One serene evening, as I knit a shawl inspired by the garden's blooms, Margaret observed, "Eleanor, at 68, you're embarking on your authentic life. Think of the horizons ahead." Spot on for eras I'd orbited others, spouse, offspring, grandkids. Now I charted my course. Physically, I transformed too. Chic bob haircut, vibrant outfits over drab practicality, subtle cosmetics enhancing my glow. Margaret's pals noted the sparkle in my eyes, the spring in my step. 7 months on, an unforeseen call. Sarah, her voice stripped of entitlement, humble. "Mom, can we converse? Not to drag you back, but to listen." We met at a neutral bistro, equidistant from our worlds. She appeared haggard, thinner, shadowed eyes, disheveled locks burdened by strife. We faced off, and for once she met my gaze squarely. "Mom," she started, "reflections shown me truths. You nailed it on many fronts." She chronicled the fallout. Fiscal woes merely the surface. She and James sparred blamefully, Alex rebuking their conduct, home a disarray of neglect, diets abysmal and costly. "But the deepest wound," she wept, "is realizing I'd lost my mother, not your utility, but you, your essence, your wisdom. I viewed you as a fixer, blind to your needs, your love." It was revolutionary, acknowledging me as human, not servant. I inquired her intent. "No expectations of return," she affirmed. "Just forgiveness, for invisibility, for coveting your funds, for undervaluing your sacrifices." Her contrition rang true, yet wariness lingered, regrets flourish amid discomfort. "Sarah," I responded, "thanks for the words, they're a start. Mending demands time, behavioral metamorphosis." She sought guidance. "How to prove it?" My reply, "Master self-reliance. Tackle your issues sans me. Value me intrinsically, not transactionally." Parting, she requested a hug. I obliged. A tentative bridge, not rote. It felt real, a daughter grasping loss's gravity. Back at Margaret's over chamomile, she queried, "How fared it?" "Promising," I sighed. "Sarah's awakening to her forfeiture." Slumber came peacefully, resentment ebbing, not full pardon, but healing's dawn. A year hence, existence hummed gently. Mornings, coffee amid Margaret's blooms, tending herbs I'd planted, thyme, basil, lavender, hands once servile, now nurturing for joy. Margaret, my chosen kin, our teas evolving into soul-baring sessions. Weekends, senior center workshops, bonding with peers who'd reclaimed selves post-neglect. My progeny adapted gradually. Thomas's monthly visits shed entitlement. He inquired sincerely, shared sans agenda, a peer dynamic. Rebecca's weekly calls pivoted, probing my pursuits, cheering my knitting sales at craft fairs. "Mom, your creativity astounds," she'd enthuse. Alex visited fortnightly, our bonds rekindled. He absorbed my tales of yore, of his late grandpa Henry, viewing me as sage, not fixture. Sarah lagged, early visits laced with persuasion, rationales. Post-cafe epiphany, she shifted, offering aid over seeking. One anniversary Sunday of that pivotal lunch sparking my exodus, she arrived transformed. "Mom," she said, "a favor, please." Wary, I listened. "Teach me your signature stew, not for service, but to inherit your skill." Novel, knowledge exchange, not extraction. We spent hours in Margaret's kitchen, simmering broth, chatting authentically. She confided struggles, not manipulatively, but reflectively. "Mom," amid chopping onions, "your absence first irked. Then the void revealed, I missed you, your warmth turning house to home." Margaret observed discreetly, later nodding. "Eleanor's daughter sees you wholly now. Pivotal." Indeed, Sarah conversed as equals, respecting my autonomy. On my 69th birthday, Alex called, thriving academically, missing our chats. Nana, you've imparted wisdom. Elders are gems, meriting dignity universally. Sorting relics one day, I unearthed an unfinished plea letter to Sarah begging regard. Smiling, I archived it, a relic of past supplication. Now dignity was mine, unbegged. Sundays are ritual luncheons with a garden pal, prepping, sharing, laughing. Over quiche with Faith, Margaret posed. Regrets a leaner, pondering. Lingering too long in diminishment, yes, but not the leap it restored my essence. Months on, Sarah proffered. James and I wish to gift a spa retreat you fancied, no strings. Unnecessary, I demurred. Visit volitionally for companionship. Teary, she agreed. We will, Mom. Ultimately, my boldest act wasn't fleeing Sarah's. 'Twas affirming my worth at 68, claiming joy, respect. That eve, with Margaret over herbal tea and reruns, tranquility enveloped me. Aliner's saga didn't conclude with departure. It commenced, teaching value springs inward, not from concessions. Sometimes withdrawal educates love's depth, eloquence in chosen quiet.